Hi, everyone. Just getting set
Hey,
up here. Okay. So recording started automatically when this meeting started. So I guess I'll just go ahead and give the warning. Today is Monday, October 15th, and this is the 113 release team meeting. It's being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube later. I'm Aaron Krickenberger. I'm trying to do my best Aisha Presson with my hair down, I guess. I don't know. And we're going to follow a code of conduct since this is being publicly recorded, so try not to be too much of a jerk, myself included. I'm also going to try and time box our 113 update today since we'd like to run the rest of the 112 retrospective in the second half of this meeting. So a couple announcements Aish wanted me to put out there. We're working on Alpha 1 this morning. We seem to be having some problems actually cutting the build, possibly due to the build taking longer or working differently because of the addition of an image for running conformance tests. So we're working on that. We also added 2 additional builds to the schedule. Alpha 2 is going to be built on October 23rd and RC2 on November 30th. This is with the intent of exercising release tooling once roughly every 2 weeks throughout the release cycle to make sure that everything is working smoothly. We have also heard your feedback that having the release team meeting at 11 a.m. Pacific does not work for some folks, and so we will be moving the meeting back to 10 a.m. Pacific starting on next week. And then one announcement from myself, I will probably sync up with Kendrick offline tomorrow or Wednesday. I would like to take the current list of enhancements and just present those to SIG architecture to get kind of a sanity check that all of the features that are being proposed for this release cycle really do fit within the theme of reliability and stability, and nothing like too crazy or out of the box, given that this is a shorter release cycle. So with that, my plan is to just kind of run through the agenda as written and ask each of the different roles for their updates. And I'm going to try and cap us off if we run at the half-hour mark, but I think this is going to be relatively short. So with that, I will hand off to Kendrick Coleman, our enhancements lead.
Thank you very much. I like the idea of syncing up and kind of making sure that people have an understanding of what's going to make it and what's not going to make it, because I do have a feeling that there's a few in there that are probably stretches, is the best way to put it, only because a lot of people take the default way of doing this, and if it doesn't make it for this milestone, they just automatically just punt it to the next one, without really actually thinking if it's going to make it or not.
And that's fair. Like, the goal here is just a quick sanity check prior to entering feature freeze, and then probably another one prior to entering code slush. If they tried for the stretch and it's clear they're not going to make the stretch, maybe we should back off down the line. Anyway,
yep.
Keep going.
Absolutely. So a few things have changed. There were some ups and some downs, but as of since last week, so 3 more issues have been added to the spreadsheet. So now we're at totally 41 that are being tracked. I think a few extra ones were in regards of SIG storage. They seem to have quite a bit in there that they're trying to push for 113. This morning, I went ahead and removed the final 4 issues that were sitting stale with inside of the 112 milestone and just cleared it from there, made sure that they were in a tracked no position. And so the 112 milestone has officially been closed. The last week, Aisha and I kind of took a tag team effort, and we went to the following SIGs to make sure that we were setting expectations properly for what 113 was going to be about. And that's going to wrap up actually meeting with all of the SIGs themselves. And we are now just going to be moving forward with the usual process of pinging people and waiting for issues to be responded to. And if anybody that's unaware, as he'd already mentioned, that we have our feature freeze, or enhancements freeze, I'm sorry, October 23rd is the target date. And that's all I have for the moment, unless there's any other questions.
Okay, cool. Moving on to CI signal, we have an update from Morton. Are you here?
Yep, I'm on
Okay.
call.
Go for it.
Yeah, so Josh sent out a CI signal report last week. Since then, I think one issue has been closed, one new thing showed up with failing tests. Then there's some flakiness in some tests. But yeah, we're working through. Most of them have people looking into it. In the signal report, some of the links are broken now because some of the test suites changed names, and that will be updated in a new test report that will be sent out tomorrow. I think that's it. There's one other thing, that's the code NS will be merged. So it'll be on Friday, I think, this week. So we'll be monitoring the test grid to see for any failures as a result of that.
Okay, thanks for the update, Morton. I guess I have a couple additional things I want to share there in the context of release blocking jobs real quick. I will try and just take 2 or 3 minutes here just to show you what I'm working on. It's the wrong screen. It's always the wrong screen. I'll get it right the first share one of these times. This is the perils of a multi-monitor setup. Okay, so we're looking at the meeting notes on the left. If I click through here to the sig-release repo, issue number 24 is define criteria for a job to be release blocking. There's a Google Doc in here. I would like to turn this into refined criteria that we list in the sig-release repo. I pulled out of this Google Doc the TLDR, which is that the ideal candidate finishes a run in less than an hour and runs at least every 2 hours. This is largely because we like to, towards the end of the release cycle, we like to wait for jobs to pass 3 times in a row against the same commit. So if a job takes about an hour to run, that means best case we wait 3 hours. If it's scheduled every 2 hours, that means worst case we wait 6 hours. That's generally enough time for us to make a decision within a working day. If jobs take longer than that, it starts to be a real like grind to a halt sort of situation. So then next, I wanted to try and take these criteria and turn them into some kind of query that I could run against our BigQuery data set that is automatically populated by all the job runs. So that's the spreadsheet on the left here, where I'm poking around with different thresholds for the maximum amount of time for a job and comparing that against its average run and its max run time for the past week. Same thing for how frequently the job runs, and same thing for how frequently the job passes, just regardless of commit. So I'm missing a couple criteria, like whether or not the job passes the same, passes n times in a row against the same commit and things like that. But you can see here that roughly 15 of the jobs currently in the release master blocking dashboard fit the criteria of they run in 3 hours, and they are scheduled every 3 hours, and they have a pass percent of about 90%. If I change this to 90% and I say it's got to run in no less than or no more than 60 minutes, and it's scheduled every 1 hour, things don't look quite so. Oh, hang on, 0.9. Things don't look quite as good. We have 5 jobs. So I'm working to, I'm just all messing with this all locally until I can get a job that actually generates something and put the criteria in the thing. I expect to have this happen later this week. That's my update there. With that, we'll proceed. Oh, and the reason all the dashboards got renamed is a similar effort to try and make sure that all the dashboards have the same jobs and the same naming scheme. So it's really easy to just kind of identify what dashboard you're looking at and what job you're looking at. With that, I will hand off to Nico to update us on bug triage.
Hello. So this week, mainly I continued on the spreadsheet automation. The first prototype was fully on Google Sheet functions, but it started to hit rate limits on my account. I started moving the functions into Google Apps Script, which is like JavaScript, and but it doesn't behave so nice. So another workaround would be to split the sheets with another account maybe the PR page will go to Aish account, but we'll see about that. Bug triage wise, some tickets are updated and on track, but most of them don't have any update on since they became on the new milestone on 113. And I wonder whether a new tag would help on that, that signifies whether an issue is being actively worked on to avoid pinging everyone all the time, or keeping track, whether something is worked on.
We've tried that, and it's complicated. People seem to respond best to the human touch. So, yeah, I don't know. We've gone back and forth. I don't want to say like this is impossible, but if in past experience the tag itself hasn't been sufficient, and partly because there's so much noise in GitHub that people just don't see those regardless of whether it's a tag or not. And the best actions we get are when one of us has done a triage and reaches out to an individual and says, hey, we're needing a little bit of forward progress here.
Okay. Gwen popped her video on, but just briefly before she gives the experience of a prior issue bug triage person, I think we added, you know how Fatabot goes through and adds like lifecycle stale, lifecycle rot, whatever. There's also a lifecycle active command. And lifecycle is one of the things that anybody can use. So if you know you're working on an issue, you can tag it as lifecycle active. We got rid of all the status in progress, status approved for milestone, whatever things, because nobody seemed to know how those worked. And it was also restricted to a smaller group of people. I would also say that historically right now, it kind of doesn't matter too much because we only really start paying super close attention as we get closer to code freeze. We don't historically have the best track record on putting everything into the milestone right now in one lump sum, both PRs and issues, and like burning down from now. We kind of only start to focus our attention on that once we get to code freeze. But with that, I'll hand off to last release cycles issue triage lead. Gwen, do you have any comments?
Hey, yeah, I'm so sorry. I think I missed a little bit of what Nico was saying, but it sounded like it was relevant. In terms of getting people to respond, my experience is what you say, Aaron. It's completely when I go and I actually just stalk someone in channel, or mostly on Slack. I usually got a pretty quick response, including people who live and work in a different time zone from myself. The one thing that I want to happen with labels is that I want issues and PRs to basically be treated the same in terms of labeling, in terms of requirements. I don't know if that's the case right now. The other thing that I think Nico's getting at is it's super helpful to get on this kind of thing early. And I know that I have been confused by not everything being in the milestone. Like things keep getting merged into Kubernetes all the time, and they are seemingly completely unrelated to any kind of project. So I don't know that we have a really good way to differentiate between, is this a specifically next release milestone thing that we're talking about? And is this just like a random, oh, let's merge something? That seems weird. And I'm not sure what's going on there.
Two comments I would throw in there. On the stuff just merging, it feels weird. That is how this community operates for the majority of the cycle. Like it's kind of a free-for-all, rapid delivery of stuff. And the only way I see that really changing is if we go to a shorter release cycle where rigor is demanded on an ongoing basis. And it's just not with a quarterly release. But also, I think maybe related to that, like you were saying, it's important to try to get the mindset early on that it's not just like, we'll be rigorous later. because that doesn't work. You really have to build that culture. So even if you're, I guess for Nico, is you're going out and reaching out to the folks one-on-one on Slack to say like, hey, looking for some status here, you'll kind of start to sound like a broken record asking that over and over again. And Gwen and I went through the same thing. But one little micro messaging thing that I try to do there is say, hey, don't forget that other people are trying to follow along with what you're doing. So just dropping the occasional update in the issue will help us, and we'll ask you less. And I won't say that I've succeeded in changing culture with that, but I'm hoping if we keep saying that, that maybe we'll start building a little bit more of a culture of regularly communicating.
I see. Yeah, that's quite helpful. Thank you. I'll start the next week picking people and writing a message on issues.
And
Bring
Nico,
awareness.
just on that point, I dropped a link in the chat about saved replies in GitHub, which can help speed up or at least automate that process a bit on your end, because you're going to be saying the same thing a bunch of times to the same people. So there is tooling in GitHub to help you make that process a little bit easier.
So I opened an issue to enforce a milestone all the time. I think this came up as a result of the conversation from the Cherry Picks PR for K community. If we're enforcing that, if we're just simply adding an extra label to a comment and enforcing that mindset all the time, enforcing that all the time, I think the mindset will follow. So
that could be useful. I think the issue is right now we kind of want to the most friction-free process. Excuse me, muted. We want the least amount of friction possible right now. The idea is to introduce additional friction down the line. So right now, adding a milestone is something that is restricted to a specific group of people. It's not something that anybody can do. So it's either that we need to change the restrictions on that command temporarily and then start to restrict them as we get further in the process and would like the release team to exercise more control, or we think about building automation that would automatically add the milestone at certain times. And that's something we'll have to scope out and build.
So I think there's a fuzzy union between the people who have access to apply a milestone and the ones that would be approving the PRs anyway. So if it's a matter of them adding an extra line to their approval that adds the milestone, I'm not sure that I see much friction in that.
But that's also an argument for automation of adding milestones.
Well, yes, but the automation may be tricky because you're trying, the model, at least from what I understand it, is you are trying to combine two somewhat distinct concepts.
So I actually want to kick this conversation back over to the retro so I can keep our update time box to 11:30 if that's okay with everybody. So I thank you for the update on bug and issue triage, Nico. Tim, are you here to talk about docs?
Hey, yeah. So the first thing I just want to surface for everybody is K website has a slightly different branch name for the 1.13 release for this release cycle. So it used to be that you would make a PR against a release-version for a certain release. So last release cycle, you made a PR against release-1.12. Now, for upcoming releases, the branch name is going to change. So for this release, docs PR should be made against the dev-1.13 branch in K website. So that's all the information is on the PR template for K website. So hopefully there shouldn't be that much friction, but just wanted to surface that for all of you in case something like that comes up. Apart from that, have cleaned up the docs info on this on the spreadsheet, and it's now all up to date. And we'll be reaching out to enhancement owners this week to get the work in progress PRs open against K website.
Okay. Thank you very much for the update on docs, Tim. Mike, are you here? Don't know that I see you here. So update on release notes is that There have been no release notes since 1.12 as of yet. That's not super surprising. We're incredibly early in the cycle. And there's a meeting for the release note shadows tomorrow. And Mike needs emails from, I hope I'm pronouncing Tund right, and Adam. Okay, anything else that we need to talk about for this week on the 1.13 release cycle? All right, excellent. With that, I'm going to hand over. Tim, would you like me to moderate the rest of the retrospective? Because I think you have a couple items to speak to on this, or would you like to run the retrospective?
I think a moderator is good, although I think you might have one on there as well. So either way, we can talk.
I do have one on here. I'm totally fine if somebody else just says, stop talking, Aaron, you've been rambling for too long.
All right. You do that to me, I'll do it to you, and we will all get by as a team.
Okay, that's teamwork.
All right,
so I'm pasting the link. So we are switching from 1.13 release. Thanks, everybody. If you want to stick around for the rest of the retrospective on 1.12, where we reach the part where we talk about what we're going to do differently this release cycle and come up with some action items, please stick around. I have no idea where we left off in the retrospective last week, but I see actually there is a resume here in sig-release meeting line. So I pasted the link in the notes, but do people want me to share the share my screen with the doc on it so we all know what we're talking about?
So this will fail ultimately.
Well, let's just roll right into. Tim, do you want to talk about, Tim and Guinevere want to talk a little bit about GCE and GKE coupling?
I think I captured this one primarily for Gwen, but we were having a conversation about it, so I'll start with her.
All right, let me find that in the notes real quick. Go ahead, Tim.
So I guess to give the background of the general issue is that right now, when we're going through test results, a large portion of the test cases are running in a way that's coupled somehow or another with GCE or GKE. And wobbliness or flakiness in the underlying platform leads to test flakiness. And we've had trouble, or I don't know if we've, trouble almost overstates it, but we haven't had the best or the most transparent or fluent communication with the Googlers in charge of the platform. We don't always know who do we ping. We don't even know what type of information they would prefer to get from us. So maybe it's something for a template that would help them understand what problems we're seeing to more quickly get to whether or not we have a GCE issue just generically. Because we kind of end up asking around on Slack, and then sometimes we just sort of hear back like, oh yeah, so-and-so knows about that, they're working on it. And then that leads to the final segment of the sentence there, getting status back. We'd kind of, in those cases, we just sort of hear like, yeah, it should be fixed this week. And we didn't know who to talk to. We didn't know deterministically when it was fixed, how to check that the fix was in. And it was just sort of waiting and hoping that things that had been red will go green. And that's not issue triage. Hope isn't engineering.
Hope is not strategy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the TM line.
Isn't that, yeah. Don't you all have that in Latin on your fancy dragon stickers?
No, but we will sell you an SRE book that says that.
Okay, well, I want one. Anyway, yeah. Basically, I think what Aish and I were talking about a little bit was the possibility of having like a contact person on the inside.
So what I would like to do here is maybe try and separate this into the GCE and the GKE jobs. I feel historically we have not had the best track record for the GKE jobs, and I'm going to be pushing really hard that we remove them from release blocking. I don't think that a hosted offering that is not open source should actually be blocking the release of Kubernetes. Like AKS and EKS don't block Kubernetes today, and I don't want to allow that going forward. I see no reason that GKE should be doing the same thing. job ownership and owner responsiveness is one of the criteria we have in play for, or I aspire for us to have in there for whether or not a job should be release blocking. So I want to focus here in the retro on whether or not there are any GCE side things that we could do, because I think you've made a pretty eloquent case that the GKE side of things was not adequate. Failing that, maybe we just go ahead and move on to the next issue about kind bug. Also, just a administrative note, I want to leave us at least 10 minutes at the end of this to talk about what we're going to do better. So I will cap off discussion with 10 minutes remaining. Start talking about action items. So Gwen or Tim, you're up on kind bug.
Yep. This is literally what I've just been saying several times already, and I apologize for saying it earlier because I was confused what we were doing. Yeah, I want pull requests to be labeled as kind bug if they are a bug fix, and I want that to be part of the culture and part of the expectation. Always keeping in mind that cultural change is hard to impose from on top, but basically I want pull requests to be treated the same as issues in that regard.
So I don't know if we had the automation to require kind labels prior to you putting this item down. Do you think requiring kind labels is sufficient to address this?
Yes, I am actually currently supposed to be working on an additional line in the pull request template that adds this. So that is a thing that that I really wanted to add, and I haven't started it yet.
We do have automation to require kind labels.
But yes.
Yeah. I know that's something that Cole had to put in place last minute prior to flipping over to Tide. So I think the question I'm asking is like whether or not people were inconsistently using kind bug, or whether this was still during the period where kind was not required for merge.
This is possible, but there was also discussion on people feeling uncomfortable putting kind bug on a bug fix pull request. So we can address that with just mentioning this in the pull request template and maybe adding that to the label description. I'm not sure that's, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, people were like, this feels weird. It's a bug fix. It's not a bug. And I'm like, yeah, look, but I really don't feel that should be, that we should differentiate.
I mean, that's a good point, because I kind of feel the same way, that it's a bug fix and not a bug. So before we do something, can we figure out like how we feel about that? Because it makes me weird too.
I want less labels. I want to keep us to the magic number of 7 plus or minus 2 kind labels. So I think just clear messaging on kind, and the fact that when you're filing an issue, you're probably filing an issue about a bug. When you're PRing something with the word bug in it, you're probably fixing that bug. Otherwise, I think the reviewer should not be LGTMing a PR that knowingly introduces a bug. That's kind of bad on the reviewer and approver.
Yeah, I feel we can easily make a case of having it cover both.
Yeah, so moving on, Aish had something in here about Tide not giving us the ability to merge PRs as part of like a priority or critical batch. Is this something that we think we could somehow allow with like a different Tide queries specifically for critical fixes or something along those lines? Cole has his thinking face on.
It's certainly something that we could consider. There's like a number of ways that we could go about implementing that. Is this about prioritizing an individual PR or like a set of PRs, presumably?
Individual. I was going to pause for a second there just to say, does the use case make sense?
Yeah, we've tried to avoid any sort of prioritization in Tide, but I think at this scale, there's probably some need for it. So we can look into how we do that.
Yeah, the main time when this came up was when we opened up the queue. There were a lot of things getting into the queue, right? Just after a release, and then we had some really critical fixes that we wanted to merge, but we couldn't merge in the one point in the release branch before it merges in the main branch. So
I think we specifically had right around 100 PRs that were ready to merge when we had our code thaw.
right, that
And
was
it
the
took
main
about
thing.
48 hours for those to ripple through.
Right.
So the thinking here is that we were really uncomfortable with deviating from our normal process, because our normal process is you always merge things into master first, and then you cherry pick them into the release branch afterwards. And yes, this is the special case when merging into master suddenly becomes super backlogged, but it's really, really critical that we get things into the release branch. I'm just wondering if it, like the workaround that we did kind of expressed our intent a lot better, which is that we have a separate set of tied queries specifically for the release branches. We can put the fix into the release branch first, because that's the branch off of which we're going to be cutting the bits, and that's the branch whose signal we are watching anyway. And then we can have that fix merge into master afterwards as part of
What's the
Oh,
downstream.
motivation behind starting code thaw or like opening up the floodgates before the release is ready?
The idea is we really don't want to impede development of ongoing features. We'd like to keep code thaw as short as we can, and it seems as though like there's a long tail of bug fixes at the end of the release cycle, where it trickles down to just like one or two really critical things that need to be fixed, but it also takes us a while to figure out if they actually fix the problem at hand. I'm thinking specifically of scalability related issues here, but there could be other examples. So I think it's just impossible to, it seems like we would really extend code freeze up for a very long time if we waited until everything was absolutely perfect and we don't actually release the freeze until we cut a release.
I don't know. It seems like in my recollection of things that we're talking about maybe 20 or so cherry picks. Like I'm not sure how long that should take to merge into master and then cherry pick in. Like I
So
don't,
the
if it was
specific
too,
case here, in this last release, we had one thing we were waiting for, and it was backed up behind 100 PRs, and it took 48 hours. And
I can tell you why we don't want the concept of prioritization, and that's because shuffling PRs around really breaks the concept of being able to batch up PRs. It kind of invalidates everything that was backed up behind those PRs if you start shuffling them around. So our goal with dropping prioritization was we'll solve this by just increasing merge velocity to the point where prioritization is a problem. I think immediately after code thaw is the one special case where that kind of harms us. The reason it takes so long to come out of code thaw is because our tests are so flaky. So if we made our tests less flaky, we would merge faster and we wouldn't experience this pain so much. But I agree, it's perhaps something I'd like us to move on. It's maybe something we could put an action item to investigate whether we want to do this, or investigate whether we want to make it the established process to be okay with putting things directly into the release branch as sort of the final phase of the release.
I think if we get the velocity up with the flakes down, that would almost never be an issue either way, and we could deal with it on a one-off basis as intelligently as we could.
So maybe related to this, Tim, the next item from you is about delaying code thaw until later.
Yeah, so in the things that worked well, having the delay was really useful because it meant we had this strong separation between master and release branch, and master had basically nothing coming into it, which meant we had twice the test coverage, and that helped make up for the large number of flakes and variability. We could get a little bit better signal. So then that led to a very short period at the end relative to the thaw. So thaw was followed very quickly by when we were intending to release, and everything that we were just talking about happened as a little bit of a different surprise than some of the prior releases. So again, I think less flakes is probably the answer to a large part of these problems.
Okay. You also have the next item, which is about the serial tests.
Yeah, so speaking of flakes, these tests are really flaky. I think they're not even as good as a coin toss. And then if they're taking 8 hours to run, that goes back to the potential problems with the hosting platform. If there's the slightest variability there, something for a platform wobble causes a weird timeout or something. That's just much more likely to happen on a long test. Aaron, you were talking about this in Austin in the SIG testing deep dive. I think that the longer the test runs, the more likely it is to fail. And this is one where it almost may as well not be in the grid, I feel like, because it's almost impossible to get information from it.
Yep. I'm not going to disagree, but I would probably counter with that there's probably so much more coverage in there. So I would suggest as a follow-up item that we evaluate whether or not this is really necessary. Certainly my fancy dancy spreadsheet, I can just tell you offhand that it took anywhere from 6 to 12 hours for the serial test to run, and the job passage percent was 40%. So that does not match the ideal we were talking about earlier, and I would consider it informational at best. So I know, I don't think it's this job specifically. We were looking at maybe parallelizing some of the upgrade jobs tests and sharding things up, but I feel like further analysis of this should be taken offline, but it's well understood and has been acknowledged in the past that the serial jobs just don't really seem to be useful, and this has got another release team that is saying the same thing. You have also got the next item on GKE, but if it's cool with you, I think we've already
covered it. Yep.
GKE.
We're in agreement. We're going to punt those.
Let's talk about tagging issues in test grid.
So I think this goes back maybe to the question earlier before we started the retro of how we understand that something is in progress. On other projects that I've worked on where we had something like test grid, if somebody had triage, they could click the cell and stick a little text annotation. And it was... Mm-hmm.
I can speak to, sorry for cutting you off. I can speak to the fact that we're still working on trying to open source test grid, and internally test grid lets people tag individual test failures and tie them back to issues. The reason we can't yet do that in open source land is because there's no concept of authentication or authorization baked in just yet. So we need to consider how to maybe do something like, say you can actually do this if you're authorized by something like GitHub OAuth, or maybe you're part of some sort of GitHub team.
That makes sense.
I think what I tried to do as CI signal in the past to make this easy was to copy verbatim the test name and use that as an issue title. So that way people could at least search GitHub for that issue title. I also tried to copy paste that text and put it into the triage dashboard so that people could reference whether or not that test is failing just in a specific job or across multiple jobs. And they could then link to the specific cluster of failures that seem to be the biggest to best represent, it's not just failing this one place in this one job, it's actually failing across these 10 different jobs, but they all seem to have the same error message. And I don't know if that's still spelled out in the CI signal playbook, but that's the sort of template and pattern I tried to put in there. Did that address your thing, or do you have more to add there?
Nope, that's it. Yeah, I think whatever the practice is, just making sure that we're communicating so more eyes can be aware of status as it evolves hour to hour, especially later in the release.
Okay. The next item is mine. This is something I hope to do, but I would really appreciate, I think anybody in the community could do this, and I would really welcome the help. I find that almost every release cycle, we end up at these critical decision points, and we ask ourselves, wait, how did we do this last time? Or roughly speaking, how good or healthy were things looking at this point in the release cycle in the past? And right now, it's one of the reasons I have been part of so many release cycles, is because I feel like I'm a human and I have a brain and I have a memory. It's not super reliable though, but I at least kind of get, I have my individual machine learning thing going on here, and I do some fuzzy pattern matching, and every once in a while some wisdom gets kicked loose. But I think it would be worth somebody going back and reviewing the retrospectives and the meeting burn downs and kind of trying to summarize some of these key decision points. So I feel like it could be helpful when we find ourselves asking these questions to put them down. And so the example I used, which kind of ties into a point Aish has further down, is like, how long does it usually take to cut the release? And like, when do we usually start this? Like, when have we started cutting releases in the past? Does anybody know? So I feel like having some of this information distilled down and compiled would be incredibly useful. And it really just takes a human being going back and reading a bunch of documents and trying to collate these things together.
Do you think we'd put that in the top level release lead role handbook doc or somewhere else, or in the sub role docs?
It could be possible. Like, I think it's a great thing for somebody in, like, not that I am volunteering myself because I'm maxed out here, but I think a release lead shadow could do this really well, or I think it would be a really great preparatory thing to get some context on how things have been done historically to allow you to act as a release lead. But I think more or less anybody could try and go through and summarize this, even just to like sort of assess what's the state of the release. Generally speaking, what is the release process?
Yeah, I think we probably could use a dedicated like secretary role for that. And I tried to be the change I wanted to see in 1.6, and I brought it up every release afterwards. So if you go into the release 1.6 directory in sig-release, you can see where we tried to do that for both flake, for like test flakes, and what was the go, no go decision for that particular day. And I would love to see that carried forward, but I haven't personally had the time to do it for every other release that I haven't been the co-lead for or taking an explicit role doing that. So, but there is a template. We have prior art of trying to do literally that. So if we could put some wood behind those arrows, it would be great.
Yep. So we have about 5 minutes left here. So I think I addressed Aisha's point about can we start the release before the afternoon Pacific time? Yes, in my opinion, the release really should be started immediately after a meeting at a time kind of like this, like anywhere from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific, so that ideally it is done and ready to go out the door by 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific. Maybe doing it on a Friday, also not the best idea.
Yeah, definitely not on a Friday. And that has been the historical target, was to have the release finished by end of day on the release day.
Yes. She also has an item here about could we potentially stage and mock release docs for a few of the interim releases instead of only waiting for the final release push. So I have no idea if Doc's new branch naming strategy could help support us here or not.
Yeah, so there is a Netlify preview of the release branch, which is constantly updated whenever anything lands in that branch. I think the main issue here is probably the generated docs. I know there were some issues during the 1.12 release around generating the API and CLI docs. So I think it would be a good idea to generate those a couple of times throughout the cycle and just test it. In general, there are issues with the doc generation currently anyway, so it might be helpful to have that in order to make sure those issues get fixed. So I'll go back to SigDocs and we'll suggest this to them.
We've got a nice pattern in the build artifacts for the binaries where the tools all accept a no mock option, and by default they're doing a mock build that doesn't commit or publish the results, but you can get them locally just to look at, and maybe that would be a pattern to look at.
Yeah, okay. I don't know exactly like how the generation is working currently, but
yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah,
I don't either. Okay, thank you. So I think we're good there. Maybe Aisha has some context we can fill that in follow-up meetings. Thank you for saying we can skip the next item, Hans. We are being a little more prudent and mindful about how packages are cut and sharing that knowledge. So you have another item about it would be great to gather newcomers and show them the different tools we use. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I was new in 112, and I wondered what is going on in the other teams, and which tools, which processes are they using. And I had the idea maybe it's worth gathering all the newbies and just like show every team showing off how they kind of do the work and which tools they use. Of course, this is some sort of a commitment by the teams, but I think it might be worth it if every team like gets a slot of 5 minutes, 10 minutes showing off how they do their work.
Yeah, so that's one of the roles or purposes of the shadowing. So I guess, speak for the branch management. So one of the roles or one of the tasks I did there was to meet with the current branch manager and their shadows to go over how releasing Kubernetes works and what tools are used for that particular role. So I think are you saying that you are seeing a gap between what the lead is doing and what your training is as like a new person coming in or as a shadow? Like, well, what's the delta you're looking at?
I was more wondering about, like, I was shadow for release branch management, and I would have loved to get a bit more insight into, let's say, CI signal, which tools are they using, or whatever, enhancement tracking and that stuff. So I think it would be worth showing all the tools which all the teams are using for all the newbies, if that makes sense.
So I think it's worth it to call out again, like everyone should be documenting. I think it should be everyone's responsibility to not only document on the sig-release repo, but to also read the documentation across the different roles. I think overall the process of one, mentoring a shadow, and two, shadowing yourself is intensive. So I don't know how to fix that specifically, but I think having everyone involved and looking at the tools or where we point people for the tools that we use is important too.
I agree. I guess I've noticed we've started to have like individual roles meet with their shadows, which is great. I do have a concern that it gets a lot more tribal if we're passing everything down via video conference. And I strongly agree with having more of this documented. So we should have like a page that shows a rough summary of what each role is and what their responsibilities are. For your ask for the tools directly, I think something I'm trying to do this quarter is to put together some video walkthroughs of the tools that CI Signal uses, at least. Like, I don't know if it's super necessary for you to see all of the lovely lines of text that scroll by in Doug's console window when he cuts a release. But I hear you that you're looking for what are the interfaces and touch points, so I understand what the different roles and responsibilities are and how I can make life easier for the different roles. So that's sort of like getting the team to gel a little bit, I think, is the purpose of starting these release burn down meetings a lot earlier in the release cycle, is for us to get used to working with each other and keeping track of things and how we interface. Because again, like, none of this is really super strictly necessary until we start getting much closer to code slush and code freeze. It used to be historically that these weekly meetings didn't happen until we went right into code freeze. So this is the closest thing we have to kind of tribally figuring out how everything works, what the gaps are, what we don't understand, and specifically to how some of the tools can be used. I would like to, I'm seeking to try and improve demonstration of automation in the Kubernetes community meetings in general, and then seeing if we can take those and turn those into videos that could be clipped out, or I will be doing dedicated videos for tools like Test Grid and Triage and just bouncing around from a PR to Kubernetes to seeing the test history for it, stuff like that. But again, that's all sort of very issue triage and CI signal triage focused, but to me, that's the more important step of just like figuring out what's going on and how everything is tied together. I don't know so much about the other individual tools. So with that, we have about 8 minutes scheduled left for what we want to do differently this time. I don't even know if we actually followed up on did we do what we said we'd do last time. So does anybody have any proposed action items for what they would like to do differently this time or try to improve as part of the 113 release process based on everything that we have discussed thus far?
Sorry for joining in late. Thanks, Aaron, for running it. So one thing that we are doing differently is like involving, shadows, continuing on to the point, shadows at least more actively for both CI and the branch manager role a little bit. For the alpha we have multiple alphas and RCs this time, and at least for the alpha 2, either Hannes or Yang, they volunteered to be cutting and running the, cutting the release and publishing it. So that should give them more hands-on experience. And also for CI, I know Josh is working really close with his shadows to even delegate some of the failures to them and also involve them in putting the weekly reports together. So at least that's one thing this cycle we plan to do, take the help from the shadows a bit more. And also we increased the frequency of the number of builds and releases itself so that we can exercise the release tools more frequently. I will go back and take a look at the notes to see what came out of the docs and using the doc tool and the release notes tool more frequently in the release.
So a note to the shadows, you should feel free to get involved, and you should be getting involved as much as your lead is, if you have the tools and ability to. If you feel like you don't have those tools or ability, let your lead know, let someone know. The whole point of having the shadows program is to be able to leverage everyone more effectively and kind of spread the load. So make sure that you're being enabled just as much as and not just kind of watching the release cycle go by, right? Make sure you're involved.
Another way I would say that is, Shadow, consider that you will take on this role in the next release. And if you have any questions, make it very clear to your lead that they need to be more explicit on what they're doing day to day so you can take it up.
And to add to that, there is a point in the cycle where the leads sit down and think about who's going to take over the role. So consider that as the cycle comes to close.
I think what worked for me was just having continuous open discussion on both ends while I was a shadow and while I was a lead, just having people speak up and ask questions. I try not to be too scary about being approachable.
I mean, one thing I'll throw out there, since we do have such a short time and we didn't really capture action items along the way, is for those of you who are involved in the current release cycle to consider what process changes you would be willing to introduce into the release earlier in the release cycle. Generally speaking, one of the gripes I've had of release teams in the past is they decided to do everything completely differently, like right during code freeze. And I think that earlier is a lot better for introducing process changes. It gives you the time to message it out. So if we believe things like constantly requiring milestone for all pull requests and issues is something we care passionately about, we should draft together a proposal for what we want, why we want it, what the benefits are, and how it's going to be implemented. And then we should do that probably prior to code freeze. I really don't know what the hard line is that I would draw there, but I think maybe I'm asking if you want to come to next week's release team meeting with a suggestion of what you might do differently or want to improve, if anything.
Yeah, I don't think there's a hard line. I think the answer is always sooner, like to your point, always sooner rather than later. I think some of the specific points of it are kind of hard to wrap your head around. One, if you're a shadow. Two, if you just haven't done the role before. So
just to lead by example on some action items that I've taken on to do differently this release cycle is number one, I plan on changing the way or adding. I plan on parsing out the upgrade versions, both what we're upgrading from and what we're upgrading to, so that that is visible in Kubernetes in test grid. Right now, you only see the version that we're upgrading from, and so people constantly ask, wait, what version did we upgrade to? Did this fix get into the release branch before the upgrade tests ran? Because the upgrade tests take forever to run, so it'd be really easy to see that at a glance. Making sure that we have the exact same set of blocking jobs on all of the release branches, as well as understanding why there's a slight difference between the blocking jobs that are on master versus the release branches. Thinking specifically of like the scalability jobs and the kube-adm package publish job. I think we should remove jobs that have been continuously failing for more than n days, where right now I'm saying n is 120. There are some jobs where n is 380. I'm trying to triage those down to specific classes of failures. I had an action item to allow the triage dashboard to look back further than a week. It now looks back 2 weeks. That's about as far as I can conceivably have it look back, and have it update every 20 minutes rather than every hour. I'm working on defining the release blocking jobs according to objective criteria, as I showed earlier in the meeting. I think we should remove the GKE jobs from release blocking. I plan on using those metrics and the lack of responsiveness as a reason for why. The other two items I picked up in our chat are that CI signal will be involving the shadows and cutting the reports as opposed to the lead doing all of the duties there. And that Tim is going to go and talk to SigDocs about making sure there are preview runs of release builds available earlier. Have I missed anything?
And also, naming the master blocking and the release blocking to be similar, and then also consolidating the dashboards. That's also something you guys were tracking on.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, 1 minute left. Do you want it back?
Gee, thanks.
So generous.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a wonderful Monday.
Later, everyone.
See ya. Bye, everyone.